The Experiences of Loveday Brooke, Lady Detective, by C.L. Pirkis. The bag left on a doorstep. "It's a big thing," said Loveday Brooke, addressing Ebenezer Dyer, chief of the well-known detective agency in Lynch Court, Fleet Street. "Lady Cathro has lost £30,000 worth of jewelry, if the newspaper accounts are to be trusted." "That is fairly accurate at this time. The robbery differs from a few respects from the usual run of town robberies. The time chosen, of course, was the dinner hour, when the family and guests were at the table and servants not on duty were amusing themselves in their own quarters. The fact of it being Christmas Eve would also be a necessity to add to the business the consequent distraction of the household. The entry to the house, however, in this case, was not effected in the usual manner by a ladder to the dressing-room window, but through a window of the room on the ground floor, a small room with one window and two doors, one of which opens into the hall, and the other leads to back stairs to the bedroom floor. It was used, I believe, as a sort of hat and coat room by the gentleman of the house." "It was, I suppose, the weak point of the house?" "Quite so, a very weak point indeed. Dragon Court, the residence of Sir George and Lady Cathro, was an oddly built old place, jutting out in all directions, and as this window looked out upon a blank wall, it was filled with stained glass and kept fastened by a strong brass latch, and never opened day or night, ventilation being obtained by means of a glass ventilator fitted into the upper panes. It seemed absurd to think that this window, being only about 4 feet from the ground, should have had neither iron bars nor shutters added to it. Such, however, was the case. On the night of the robbery, someone within the house must have deliberately and intentionally unfastened its only protection, the brass catch, and thus given the thieves easy entrance to the house." "Your suspicions, I suppose, center upon the servants?" "Undoubtedly, and it is of the servants' hall that your services will be required. The thieves, whoever they were perfectly cognizant of the ways of the house. Lady Catherine's jewelry was kept in a safe in her dressing-room. As the dressing-room was over the dining-room, Sir George was in the habit of saying that it was the safest room in the house. Note the pun, please. Sir George was rather proud of it. By his orders, the window of the dining-room immediately under the dressing-room window was always left unshuttered and without blind during dinner, and as full strength of stream light would fill through on the outside terrace, it would have been impossible for anyone to have placed the ladder there unseen." "I see from the newspapers that it was Sir George's invariable custom to fill his house with and give large dinner on Christmas Eve." "Yes, Sir George and Lady Cathro are elderly people with no family and a few relatives, and have consequently a large amount of time to spend on with their friends." "I suppose the key to the safe was frequently left in the possession of Lady Cathro's maid?" "Yes, she is a young French girl, Stephanie Delacroix by name. It was her duty to clear the dressing-room directly after her mistress left it, put away any jewelry that might be lying around, lock the safe, and keep the key till her mistress came up to bed. On the night of the robbery, however, she admits that, instead of so doing, directly her mistress left the dressing-room, she ran down to the housekeeper's room to see if any letters had come for her, and remained chatting with the other servants for some time. She could not say for how long, but it was 7:30 post that her letters generally arrived from St. Omer, where her home is." "Oh, then, she was in the habit of thus running down to inquire the letters, no doubt, and the thieves who appeared to so thoroughly cognizant of the house would have known this also." "Perhaps, though at present moment I must say that things look very black against the girl. Her manner, too, when questioned, was not calculated to remove suspicion. She goes from one fit of hysterics into another, contradicts herself nearly every time she opens her mouth, then lays it to the charge of her ignorance of our language, breaks into voluble French, becomes theatrical in reaction, and then goes off into hysterics once more." "Oh, that is quite Francais, you know," said Lovelady. "Do the authorities of Scotland Yard lay much stress on the safe being left unlocked that night?" "They do when they are instituting a keen inquiry to the possible lovers the girl may have. For this purpose, they have sent Bates down to stay in the village and collect all the information he can outside the house. But they want something within the halls to hobnob with the maids generally, and to find out if she has taken any confidence of them into confidence respecting her lovers. So they sent me to know if I could send down for the purpose of the shrewdest and most clear-headed of my female detectives. I, in my turn, Miss Brooke, have sent for you. You may take it as a compliment if you like. So please, now get out of your notebook and I'll give you the sailing orders. Loveday Brooke, at this period of her career, was a little over 30 years of age, and could be described in a series of negotiations. She was not tall, she was not short, she was not dark, she was not fair, she was neither handsome nor ugly. Her features were altogether nondescript. Her one noticeable trait was that habit she had, when absorbed in thought, of dropping her eyelids over her eyes until only one line of eyeball showed, and she appeared to be looking at the world through a slit instead of through a window. Her dress was invariably black, and was almost Quaker-like in its neat primness. Some 5 or 6 years previously, by a jerk of fortune's wheel, Loveday had been thrown upon the world penniless and all but friendless. Marketable accomplishments she had found she had none. She had forthwith defied convention and had chosen for herself a career that had cut her off sharply from the former associations of her profession of society. For 5 or 6 years she drudged away patiently in the lower walks of her profession. Then chance, or to speak more precisely, an intricate criminal case, threw her in the way of an experienced head of a flourishing detective agency in Lynch Court. He quickly enough found out the stuff that she was made of, and threw her in the way of better class work. Work, indeed, that brought in case of pay and reputation alike to him and to Loveday. Ebenezer Dyer was not, as a rule, given to enthusiasm, but he would at times wax eloquent over Miss Brooke's qualifications for the profession she had chosen. "Too much of a lady, do you say?" he would say to anyone who chanced to call and question those qualifications. "I don't care a twopence halfpenny whether she is or is not a lady. I only know she is the most sensible and practical woman I've ever met. In the first place, she has a faculty, so rare among women, of carrying out orders to the very letter. In the second place, she has a clear, shrewd brain, unhampered by any hard and fast theories. And thirdly, the most important item of them all, she has so much common sense that it amounts to genius. Positively to genius, sir." But although Loveday and her chief, as a rule, worked together upon an easy and friendly footing, there were occasions on which they won't, so to speak, snarl at each other. Such an occasion was at hand now. Loveday showed no disposition to take out her notebook and receive her sailing orders. "I want to know," she said, "if what I saw in the newspaper is true, that one of the thieves before leaving took the trouble to close the safe door and to write across it in chalk, 'To be let, unfurnished.'" "Perfectly true, but I do not see that stress need to be laid on the fact. The scoundrels often do that kind of sort of thing out of insolence or bravado. In that robbery at Reigate the other day, they went to Lady Devonport's, took a sheet of her notepaper, and wrote their thanks on it for her kindness for not having the lock on her safe repaired. Now, if you will get out of your notebook—" "Don't be in such a hurry," said Loveday calmly. "I want to know if you have seen this." She leaned across the writing table at which they sat on either side, and handed him a newspaper cutting which he took from the letter case. Mr. Dyer was a tall, powerfully built man with a large head, benevolent bald forehead, and a genial smile. That smile, however, often proved a trap to the unwary, for he owned a temper so irritable that a child with a chance word might ruffle it. The genial smile vanished as he took the newspaper cutting from Loveday's hand. "I would have you to remember, Miss Brooke," he said severely, "that although I am in the habit of using dispatch in my business, I have never known to be in a hurry. Hurry in affairs I take to be an especial mark of the slovenly and unpunctual. Then, as if still further to give contrary to her words, he very deliberately unfolded her slip newspaper and slowly, accentuating each word and syllable, read as follows. Singular discovery. A black leather bag, or portmanteau, was found early yesterday morning by one of Smith's paperboys at the doorstep of a house in the road running between Esterbrook and Renfield. And in habit of being an elderly Spencer lady, the contents of the bag include a clerical collar and necktie, a church service, a book of sermons, a copy of the works of Virgil, a facsimile of Magna Carta with translations, a pair of black kid gloves, a brush and comb, some newspapers, and several small articles suggesting clerical ownership. On top of the bag was the following extraordinary letter, written in pencil on a long slip of paper, was found. The fatal day has arrived. I can exist no longer. I go hence and shall no more be seen. But I would have coroner and jury know that I am a sane man, and verdict of temporary insanity in this case would be most gross after this intimidation. I care not if it is fallo de se, as I shall have passed all suffering. Search diligently for my poor lifeless body in the immediate neighborhood, on the cold heath, the rail, or the river by yonder bridge. A few moments will decide how I shall depart. If I had walked right, I might have been in power of the church, in which I am now unworthy member of priest. But the damnable sin of gambling got hold of me, and betting has been my ruin, and it has been the ruin of 1,000 who have preceded me. Young man, shun the bookmaker and the race-course, as you should shun the devil and hell. Farewell, chums of Magdalen. Farewell, and take warning. Though I can claim a relationship with a duke, a marquis, and a bishop, and though I am son of a noblewoman, yet I am a tramp and an outcast, verily and indeed. Sweet death, I greet thee. I dare not sign my name. To one and all, farewell. O my poor Marchioness mother, a dying kiss to thee. Rest in peace. The police and some way of the railway officials have made a diligent search in the neighboring of the railway station, but no poor lifeless body has been found. The police authorities are inclined to believe that the letter is a hoax, though they are still investigating the matter. In the same deliberate fashion as he had opened and read the cutting, Mr. Dyer folded and returned it to Lovelady. "May I ask," he said sarcastically, "what do you see in that silly hoax to waste your and my valuable time over?" "I wanted to know," said Loveday, in the same tones as before, "if you saw anything in it that might in some way connect this discovery to the robbery of Craigen Court." Mr. Dyer stared at her in utter blank astonishment. "When I was a boy," he said sarcastically as before, "I used to play at the same game called What Is My Thought Like? Someone would think of something absurd and say at the top of the moment, and someone would hazard a guess that his thought might be, say, the toe of his left boot, or the unfortunate individual would have to show the connection between the toe of his left boot and the top of the moment. Miss Brooke, I have no wish to repeat that silly game this evening for your benefit or mine." "Oh, very well," said Loveday, calmly. "I fancied you might like to talk it over, that was all. Give me my sailing orders, as you call them, and I'll endeavour to concentrate my attention on the little French maid and her various lovers." Mr. Dyer grew amiable again. "That's the point on which I wish you to fix your thoughts," he said. "You had better start for Craigen Court by the first train tomorrow. It's about 60 miles down to the Great Eastern Line. Huxwell is at the station. You must grab land at. There is one of the grooms of the court who will meet you and drive you to the house. I have arranged with the housekeeper there, Mrs. Williams, a very worthy and discreet person, that you shall pass in the house as a niece of hers, on a visit to recruit, after severe study in order to pass board school teacher's exam. Naturally, you have injured your eyes as well as your health with overwork, so you can wear your blue spectacles. Your name, by the way, will be Jane Smith. Better write it down. All your work will lie in among the servants of the establishment, and there will be no necessity for you to see either Sir George or Lady Cathro. In fact, neither of them have been apprised of your intended visit. The fewer we take into our confidence, the better. I have no doubt, however, the Bates will hear from Scotland Yard that you are in the house, and will make a point of seeing you. Has Bates unearthed anything of importance? Not as yet. He has discovered one of the girl's lovers, a young farmer by the name of Holt, but he seems to be an honest, respectable young fellow, and entirely above suspicion. The discovery does not count for much. I think there's nothing else to ask, said Loveday, rising to take her departure. Of course, I'll send a telegraph should you need to rise in our usual cipher. The first train that left Bishopsgate for Huxwell on the following morning included among its passengers Loveday Brooke, dressed in a neat black supposed to be appropriate for servants of the upper class. The only literature of which she had provided herself in order to beguile the tedium of her journey was a small volume of bound paper boards, entitled The Reciter's Treasury. It was published at the low price of 1 shilling and seemed specifically designed to meet the requirements of a third-rate amateur reciters of the penny readings. Miss Brooke appeared to be all absorbed in its contents of this book during the first half of her journey. During the second, she lay back in the carriage with eyes closed, and motionless as if asleep or lost in deep thoughts. She stopped till the train of Huxwell aroused her, and she set her collecting together her wraps. It was easy to single out the trim groom from Craigen Court from among the country loafers of the platform. Someone else beside the trim groom had the same moment caught her eye. Bates, from Scotland Yard, got up in the style of a commercial traveller and carrying an orthodox commercial bag in his hand. He was a very wiry man with red hair and whiskers, and an eager, hungry expression of countenance. I'm half frozen with cold, said Loveday, addressing Sir George's groom. If you'll kindly take charge of my portmanteau, I'll prefer walking to driving to the court. The man gave her a few directions as to the road she was to follow, and then drove off with her box, leaving her free to indulge Mr. Bates's evident wish for talk and confidential talk along the road. Bates seemed to be in a happy frame of mind that morning. Quite a simple affair, this, Miss Brooke, he said. Walk over the course, I take it, with you working inside in the castle walls and I unearthing without. No complications as of yet have risen, and that girl does not find herself in jail before another week is over. Her head, or my name is not Jeremiah Bates. You mean the French maid? Why, yes, of course. I take it there's little doubt that what she performed the double duty of unlocking the safe and the window, too. You see, I look at it this way, Miss Brooke. All girls have lovers. I say to myself, but a pretty girl like the French maid is bound to have double the number of lovers than the plain ones. Now, of course, the greater number of lovers, the greater the chance there is of a criminal being found among them. That's plain as a pikestaff, isn't it? Just as plain. Bates felt encouraged to proceed. Well, then, arguing on the same lines, I say to myself, this girl is only a pretty, silly thing, and not an accomplished criminal, or she wouldn't have admitted leaving the safe door open. Give her enough rope to hang, and she'll hang herself. And there, too, if we let her alone, she'll be bolting off to join the fellow whose nest she has helped to feather, and we shall catch the pair of them twixt here and the Dover Straits, and also possibly get a clue that will bring us to the traces of their accomplices. Eh, Miss Brooks? That'll be a thing worth doing. Oh, undoubtedly. Who's just coming along in this buggy at such a good pace? The question was added as the sound of wheels began to behind them made them look around. Bates turned also. Oh, this is young Holt. His father farms the land a couple miles from here. He is one of Stephanie's lovers, or I should imagine about the best of the lot. But he does not appear to be the favorite, from what I hear. Just someone must have been made the running on the sly. Ever since robbery, I've told the young woman he has giving her the cold shoulder. As the young man came nearer to his buggy, he slackened his pace, and Loveday could not but admire his frank, honest expression of countenance. "Room for one. Can I give you a lift?" he said, as he came alongside them. And to the ineffable disgust of Bates, who had counted upon at least an hour's conventional talk with her, Miss Brooke accepted the young farmer's offer and mounted beside him in his buggy. As they went swiftly along the country road, Loveday explained to the young man that her destination was Cragen Court, and that she was a stranger to the place, and she must trust him to put her down at the nearest point to it that he would pass. At the mention of Cragen Pace, his face clouded. "They're in trouble there, and the trouble has brought trouble on others," he said a little bitterly. "I know," said Loveday sympathetically. "It is often so. In such circumstances, little suspicion frequently fastens to an entirely innocent person." That's it, he cried excitedly. "If you go into that house, you'll hear all sorts of wicked things said of her, and see everything setting and dead against her. But she's innocent. I swear to you that she's as innocent as you or I are." His voice rang out above the clatter of the horses' hooves. He seemed to forget that he had mentioned no name, and that Loveday was a stranger and might be at a loss to know whom he referred. "Who is guilty, heaven only knows," he went on after a moment's pause. "It isn't for me to give an ill name to anyone in that house, but I only say that she is innocent, and that I'll stake my life on." "She is a lucky girl to have found one who believes in her and trusts her as you do," said Loveday, even more sympathetically than before. "Is she? I wish she'd take advantage of her luck, then," he answered bitterly. "Most girls in her position would be glad to have a man stand through them through thick and thin, but not she. Ever since that night of that accursed robbery, she refused to see me, won't answer my letters, won't even send me a message. And great heavens, I'd marry her tomorrow if I had the chance and dared the world to say a word against her." He whipped up his pony. The hedges seemed to fly on either side of them, and before Loveday realized that half of her drive was over, he had drawn rein, and was helping her to alight at the servants' entrance to Cragen Court. "You'll tell her what I said, won't you, if you get in the company? And beg her to see me, if only for 5 minutes?" he petitioned before he remounted his buggy. And Loveday, as she thanked the young man for his kind attention, promised to make an opportunity to give his message to the girl. Mrs. Williams, the housekeeper, welcomed Loveday in the servants' hall, and they took her to her own room to pull off her wraps. Mrs. Williams was the widow of a London tradesman, and a little beyond the average housekeeper in speech and manner. She was a genial, pleasant woman, and readily entered into conversation with Loveday. Tea was brought in, and each seemed to feel at home with the other. Loveday, in the course of this easy, pleasant talk, solicited her for the whole history of the events of the day of the robbery, the number and names of guests who sat down to dinner that night, and together with some apparently trivial details. The housekeeper made no attempts to describe the painful position in which she and every one of the servants of the house had found themselves to be at the present moment. "We're none of us at our ease with each other right now," she said, as she poured out hot tea for Loveday, and piled up the blazing fire. "Everyone fancies that everyone else is suspecting him or her, trying to rake up past words or deeds to bring in as evidence. The whole house seems under a cloud, and at this time of year, too, just when everything was at its merriest." And here she gave a doleful glance at a big bunch of holly and mistletoe hanging from the ceiling. I suppose you're generally very merry downstairs at Christmas time," said Loveday. "Servants' balls, theatricals, all that sort of thing?" "I should think we were. When I think of this time last year and all the fun we had, I scarcely believe it was the same house. Our ball always follows my lady's ball, and we have permission to ask our friends to it. and we keep it up as late as we please. We begin our evening with a concert and recitations in character, and then we have supper, and then we dance right on till morning. But this year," she broke off, giving a long, melancholy shake of her head at the last book volumes. "I suppose," said Loveday, "some of your friends are very clever as musicians or reciters." "Very clever indeed. Sir George and my lady are always present during the early part of the evening, and I should like to have you see Sir George laughing fit to kill himself at Harry Emmett dressed as a prison dress, with a bit of oakum in his hand, reciting 'Noble Convict.' Sir George said if the young man had gone on stage, he would have been bound to make his fortune." "Half a cup, please," said Loveday, presenting her cup. "Who is this Harry Emmett, then? A sweetheart of one of the maids?" "Oh, he would flirt with all of them, but his sweetheart to none. He was a footman to Colonel James, who was a great friend of Sir George's, and Harry was constantly backwards and forwards bringing messages to him. His master, his father, I think, drove a cab in London, and Harry for a time did also. Then he took it into his head to be a gentleman's servant, and great satisfaction he gave as such. He was always such a bright, handsome young fellow, and so full of fun that everyone liked him. But I shall tire with all about this, and you, of course, want to talk about something so different." The housekeeper sighed again, and she thought of a dreadful robbery entered her brain once more. "Not at all. I'm greatly interested in you and your festivities. Is Emmett still in the neighborhood? I should amazingly like to hear him recite myself." "I'm sorry to say he left Colonel James about 6 months ago. We all missed him very much at first. He was a good, kind-hearted young man, and I remember he told me he was going to look after his dear old grandmother, who had a sweet stuff shop somewhere or other, but where I can't remember." Loveday was leaning back in her chair now, with eyelids drooping so low that she literally looked out through slits, instead of her eyes. Suddenly she abruptly changed the conversation. "When will it be convenient for me to see Lady Catherine's dressing room?" she asked. The housekeeper looked at her watch. "Now at once," she answered. "It's 4:45 now, and my lady sometimes goes up to her room to rest for half an hour before she dresses for dinner." "Is Stephanie still in attendance on Lady Catherine?" Miss Brooke asked as she followed the housekeeper up the back stairs to the bedroom floor. "Yes, Sir George and my lady have been goodness itself through this trying time. They say we are all innocent till we are proved guilty, and we'll have it that none of our duties are to be in any way altered." "Stephanie is scarcely fit to perform hers, I should imagine." "Scarcely. She was in hysterics nearly morning till night for the first 2 or 3 days after the detectives came. But she has now grown sullen, eats nothing, and never speaks a word to anyone except when asked. This is the ladies' dressing room. Walk in, please." Loveday entered a large, luxuriously finished room, and naturally made her way straight to the chief point of attraction in it, the iron safe fitted into the wall with a separate drawing room from the bedroom. It was a safe of the ordinary description, fitting with a strong iron door and a chub lock. And across this door was written in chalk in characters that seemed defiant in their size and boldness the words, "To be let, unfurnished." Loveday spent about 5 minutes in front of the safe, all of her attention concentrated on the big, bold writing. She took from her pocketbook a narrow strip of tracing paper and compared the writing on it, letter by letter, with that on the safe door. This done, she turned to Miss Williams and professed herself ready to follow her to the room below. Mrs. Williams looked surprised. her opinion of Miss Brooke's professional capabilities suffered considerable diminution. "The gentlemen detectives," said she, "spent over an hour in this room. They paced the floor, they measured the candles, they—" "Mrs. Williams," interrupted Loveday, "I'm quite ready to look at the room below." Her manner had changed from gossiping friendliness to that of the business profession woman hard at work in her profession. Without another word, Mrs. Williams led the way to the little room which had proved itself to be the weak point of the house. They entered it by the door which opened into the passage leading to the back stair of the house. Loveday found the room exactly where it had been described to her by Mr. Dyer. It needed no second glance at the window to see with ease with which one could open it from the outside and swing itself into the room, when the brass catch had been unfastened. Loveday wasted no time here. In fact, much to Miss Williams' surprise and disappointment, she merely walked across the room and at the one door and out at the opposite one, which opened into the large inner hall of the house. Here, however, she paused to ask a question. "Is that chair always placed exactly in that position?" she said, pointing to an oak chair that stood immediately outside the room which they had quitted. The housekeeper answered in the affirmative. It was a warm corner. "My lady was particular that everyone who came to the house on the messages should have a comfortable place to wait in." "I shall be glad if you will show me my room now," said Lovelady a little abruptly. "And will you kindly send up me a country trade directory, if there is such a thing in this house?" Mrs. Williams, with an air of offended dignity, led the way to the bedroom quarters once more. The worthy housekeeper felt as if her own dignity had, in some sort, been injured by the want of interest of Miss Brooke had evinced in the rooms which, at the present moment, she considered to show-rooms of the house. "Shall I send someone to help you unpack?" she asked, a little stiffly, at the door of Lovelady's room. "No, thank you. There's not be much unpacking to do. I must leave here by the first up train tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning? Why, I haven't told you everything there is at least for a fortnight." Then you must explain that I have been suddenly summoned home by a telegram. I'm sure I can trust you to make excuses for me. Do not, however, make them before supper time. I shall like to sit down to that meal with you. I suppose I shall see Stephanie then?" The housekeeper answered in the affirmative, and went her way, wondering over the strange matters of the lady whom, at first, she had been disposed to consider such a nice, pleasant, conversable person. At supper time, however, when the upper servants assembled at what was, to them, the pleasantest meal of the day, a great surprise was to greet them. Stephanie did not take her usual place in the room to Sumner, returned and saying that the room was empty. Stephanie was nowhere to be found. Loveday and Mrs. Williams together went to the girl's bedroom, and bore its usual appearance. No packing had been done in it, and beyond her hat and jacket, the girl appeared to have taken nothing away with her. On inquiry, it transpired that Stephanie had, as usual, assisted Lady Cathro to dress for dinner, but after that, not a soul in the house appeared to have seen her. Mrs. Williams thought the matter of sufficient importance to be at once reported to her master and mistress, and Sir George, in his turn, promptly dispatched a messenger to Mr. Bates at the King's Head to summon him to an immediate consultation. Loveday dispatched a messenger on another direction to young Holt at his farm, giving him the particulars of the girl's disappearance. Mr. Bates had a brief interview with Sir George in his study, from which he emerged radiant. He made a point of seeing Loveday before he left to the court, sending a special request to her that she would speak to him for a moment on the outside drive. Loveday put on her hat and went out to him. She found him almost dancing from glee. I told you so, now didn't I, Miss Brooke?" he exclaimed. "We'll come upon his traces before the morning. Never fear, I'm quite prepared. I knew what was on her mind all along. I said to myself, when that girl bolts, it will be after she dresses my lady for dinner, which is 2 good clear hours to herself. and her absence from the house won't be noticed, and when, without much difficulty, she can catch a train leaving Huxwell for Redford. Well, she'll get to Redford safe enough, but from Redford she'll be followed every step of the way she goes. Only yesterday I set a man there, a keen fellow at this sort of thing, and gave him full directions, and he'll hunt her down before the whole is taken properly. Taken nothing with her, do you say? What does that matter? She thinks she'll find all she wants where she's going. The feathered nest. I spoke to you about this morning. Ha! Instead of stepping into it, as she fancies she will, she'll walk straight into a detective's arms and land her paw there in the bargain. There'll be 2 of them netted before another 48 hours over our heads. For my name isn't Jeremiah Bates. What are you going to do now? Asked Loveday as the man finished his long speech. Now, I'm back to King's Head to wait for a telegram from my colleague in Redford. Once he's got her in front of him, he'll give me the instructions on what point to meet him. You see, Huxwell being such an out-of-the-way place, and only one train leaving between 7:30 and 10:15, makes us really positive that Rexford must be the girl's destination, and relieves the mind from all anxiety on the matter. Does it? Answered Loveday gravely. I can see another possible destination for the girl, the stream that runs through the wood we drove past this morning. Good night, Mr. Bates. It's cold out here. Of course, so soon as you have any news, you'll send it up to Sir George. The household sat up late that night, but no news was received from Stephanie from any quarter. Mr. Bates had impressed upon Sir George the ill advisability of setting up a hue and cry after the girl that might possibly reach her ears, or scare her from joining the person he was pleased to signate as her pal. We want to follow her silently, Sir George, silently as a shadow follows a man, he had said grandiosely, and then we shall come upon the 2 of them, and I trust upon the booty also. Sir George in his turn had impressed Mr. Bates's wishes upon his household, and if it had not been for Loveday's message dispatched early in the evening to young Holt, not a soul outside the house would have known of Stephanie's disappearance. Loveday was stirring early the next morning. At 8 o'clock, the train for Redford numbered her among its passengers. Before starting, she dispatched a telegram to her chief in Lynch Court. It read rather oddly as follows. Cracker fired. I'm just starting for Rexford. We'll wire you from there. L.B. Oddly, might read. Mr. Dyer did not need to refer to a cipher book to interpret. Cracker fired was the easily remembered equivalent of clue found in the detective phraseology of the office. Well, she had been quick enough about it this time, he soliloquized as he speculated in his own mind over what the purport of the next telegram might be. Half an hour later, there came to him a constable from Scotland Yard to tell him that Stephanie's disappearance had conjectures that were rife on the matter, and then, not unnaturally, read Loveday's telegram by the light of his information, and concluded that the clue in her hands related to the discovery of Stephanie's whereabouts as well as to that of her guilt. The telegram received a little later on, however, was to turn this theory upside down. It was, like the former one, worded in the enigmatic language current in the Lynch Court establishment, but it was a lengthier and more intricate message. It sent Mr. Dyer at once to a cipher book. Wonderful! She has cut them all out at this time, was Mr. Dyer's exclamation as he read the interpreted final word. In another 10 minutes he had given over his office to the charge of his head clerk for the day, and was rattling along the streets in his hansom in the direction of Bishopsgate Station. There he was lucky enough to catch a train just starting for Redford. The event of the day, he muttered as he settled himself comfortably into a corner seat, will be the return journey when she tells me, bit by bit, how she has worked it all out. It was not until close upon 3 o'clock in the afternoon that he arrived at the odd-fashioned market town of Redford. It chanced to be a cattle market day, and the station was crowded with drovers and farmers. Outside the station, Loveday was waiting for him, and she had told him in her telegram that she would in a four-wheeler. "It's all right," she said to him as he got in. "He can't get away, even if he had an idea we were looking for him. Two of the local police are waiting outside with office door with a warrant for his arrest, signed by the magistrates. I did not, however, see that the Lynch Court office should not have the credit for the thing, and so I telegraphed you to conduct the arrest." They drove to the high streets and to the outskirts of the town, where the shops became intermixed with private houses laid out in offices. The cab pulled up outside of one of these, and two policemen in plain clothes came forward and touched their hats to Mr. Dyer. "He's in there now, sir, doing his office work," said one of the men, pointing to the door, just within the entrance, on which was painted the letters, "The United Kingdom Cab Drivers Benefits Association." I hear, however, that this is the last time he'll be found there, as a week ago he gave notice to leave. As the man finished speaking, a man evidently of the cab-driving fraternity came up to the steps. He stared curiously at the little group. Just within the entrance, and then, chinking his money in his hand, passed on to the office as if to pay his subscription. "Will you be good enough," said Mr. Dyer, addressing the man, "that a gentleman outside wishes to speak him. Mr. Emmett, if you please." The young man nodded and passed into the office. As the door opened, it disclosed a view of an old gentleman sitting at a desk, apparently writing receipts for money. A little in his rear, at his right hand, sat a young and decidedly good-looking man at the table on which were placed various pieces of piles of silver and pence. The get-up of this young man was gentlemanlike, and his manner was affable and pleasant as he responded with a nod and a smile to the cab-driver's message. "Shan't be a minute," he said to his colleague at the other desk, as he rose and crossed the room towards the door. But once outside the door, it was closed firmly behind him, and he found himself in the center of three stalwart individuals. One of them informed him that he held in his hand a warrant for the arrest of Harry Emmett on the common charge of complicity in the Cardigan Court robbery, and that he had better come along quietly, for resistance was useless. Emmett seemed convinced of the latter fact, and grew deadly white for a moment, and then recovered himself. "Oh, someone have the kindness to fetch my hat and coat," he said in a lofty manner. "I don't see why I should be made to catch my death of cold because some other people have seen fit to make them asses of themselves." His hat and coat were fetched, and he was handed to the cab between the two officials. "Let me give you a word of warning, young man," said Mr. Dyer, closing the cab door and looking in for a moment through the window at Emmett. "I don't suppose it's punishable offense to leave a long black bag on an old maid's court step, but let me tell you, if it had not been for that black bag, you might have got clean off with your spoil." Emmett, the irrepressible, had his answer ready. He lifted his hat ironically to Mr. Dyer. "You might have put it more neatly, Governor," he said. "If you had been in your place, I would have said, 'Young man, you are justly punished for your misdeeds. You have been taking off your fellow creatures all your life long, and now you are taking you off.'" Mr. Dyer's duty that day did not end with the depositing of Harry Emmett in the local jail. The search through Emmett's lodgings and effects had to be made, and at this he was naturally present. About a third of the lost jewelry was found there, and from this it was consequently concluded that his accomplices in the crime had considered that he had borne a third of the risk and of the dangers of it. Letters and various memoranda discovered in the room eventually led to the detection of those accomplices, and although Lady Cathro was doomed to lose her greater part of her valuable property, she had ultimately the satisfaction of knowing that each one of the thieves received a sentence proportionate to his crime. It was not until close upon midnight that Mr. Dyer found himself seated in the train facing Miss Brooke, and had the leisure to ask for the links in her chain of reasoning that had led her in so remarkable a manner to connect the finding of the black bag with insignificant contents with an extensive robbery of valuable jewelry. Loveday explained the whole thing, easily, naturally, step by step, in her usual methodical manner. "I read," she said, "as I dare to say a great many people other did, the account of two things on the same paper on the same day, and I detected, as I dare say many a great other people did not, a sense of fun in the principal actor of each incident. I notice while all the people are agreed to the variety of motives that instigate the crime, very few allow sufficient margin for variety of character in the criminal. We are apt to imagine that he stalks about the world in a bundle of deadly motives under his arm, and cannot picture him at his work with a twinkle in his eye and a keen sense of fun, such as honest folk have sometimes when at work or in their calling." Here Mr. Dyer gave a little grunt. It might have been either sense or dissent. Loveday went on. "Of course, the ludicrousness of the detection of the letter found in the bag would be apparent to the most casual reader. To me the high-falutin sentences sounded, in addition, strangely familiar. I had heard or read them somewhere else, I felt for sure, and though I could not remember where at the first remember, they rang in my ears, and it was altogether out of the idle curiosity that I went to Scotland Yard to see the bag and its contents, and to copy with a slip of tracing paper a line or two of the letter. When I found that handwriting of this letter was identical to that of the translations found in the bag, I was confirmed that my impression that the owner of the bag was not a writer of the letter, and that possibly the bag and its contents had been appropriated to some railway station for some distinct purpose, and that, purpose accomplished, the appropriator no longer wished to be burdened with it and disposed of it in the readiest fashion that suggested itself. The letter, it seemed to me, had been begun with the intention of throwing the police off the scent, but the irrepressible spirit of fun that had induced the writer to deposit his clerical adjuncts upon an old-maid store-step had proved too strong for him, and had carried him away, and the letter that was intended to be pathetic ended up being comic." "Very ingenious so far," murmured Mr. Dyer. "I've no doubts when the contents of the bag are widely made known through advertisements, the claimant will come forward, and your theory will be correct." "When I returned from Scotland Yard," Loveday continued, "I found your note asking me to go around to see the respecting of the big jewelry robbery. Before I did so, I thought it would best be read once more the paper account of the case, so that I might be well up on its details. When I came to the words that the thief had written across the door of the safe, 'To be let unfurnished,' they at once connected themselves in my mind to the dying kiss to my motionless mother, and the solemn warning against the race-course and the bookmaker and the black bag letter-writer. Then, all in a fashion, the whole thing became clear to me. Some 2 or 3 years back, my professional duties necessitated my frequent attendance at certain low-class penny readings given in the South London slums. At these penny readings, young shop assistants and others of the class, glad of an opportunity to exhibit their accomplishments, declaim with great fervor, and as a rule select pieces which their very mixed audience might suppose to be appreciate. During my attendance at the meetings, it seemed to me that one book was selected in readings was of great favor among the reciters, and I took my trouble to buy it. Here it is." Loveday took out her cloak pocket the reciter's treasury, and handed it to her companion. "Now," she said, "if you will run your eye down the index column, you will find the titles of those pieces to which I wish to draw your attention. The first is The Suicide's Farewell, the second, The Noble Convict, and the third, To Let, unfinished." "By Jove, so it is!" ejaculated Mr. Dyer. "In the first of all these pieces, The Suicide's Farewell, occurs to the expressions which the black bag letter begins. The fatal day has arrived, etc., and the warnings against gambling and the allusions to a poor lifeless body. In the second, the noble convict, occur allusions to the aristocratic relationships of a dying kiss of a Marchionless mother. The third piece, To Let Unfurnished, is a foolish little poem enough, although I dare to say it raised often laugh a not too discriminating audience. Tell how a bachelor, calling at a house to inquire after rooms to be let unfurnished, falls in love with the daughter of the house and offers her his heart, which he says is to be let unfurnished. She declines his offer and retorts to thinking that his head must be unfurnished too. With these three pieces before me, it was not difficult to see the thread connection between the writer of the black bag letter and the thief who wrote across the empty safe in Craigen Court. Following this thread, I unearthed the story of Harry Emmert, footman, reciter, general lover, and scamp. Subsequently, I compared the writing in my tracings paper with that of the safe door, and allowed for the difference between the bit of chalk and a steel nib, and came to the conclusion that there could be but little doubt but that they were both written by the same hand. Before that, however, I had obtained another, and what I considered the most important link in my evidence chain, how Emmert brought his clerical dress into use.
Ah, how did you find out about that now? Asked Mr. Dyer, leaning forward on his elbows and his knees.
In the course of conversation with Miss Williamson, whom I found the most communicative person, I elicited the names of guests who had sat down to dinner at Christmas Eve. They were all people of undoubted respectability in the neighborhood. Just before dinner was announced, a young clergyman presented himself at the front door, and asking to speak with the rector of the parish. The rector, it seems, always dines with Craigen Court on Christmas Eve. The young clergyman's story was that of the man who had told a certain clergyman, whose name he mentioned, that the curate was wanted in the parish, and he travelled down from London to offer his services. He had been, he said, to the rectory and had told the servants where the rector was dining, and fearing to lose a chance at curacy, he followed him to the court. Now the rector had been waiting to curate and had filled the vacancy for a previous week. He was a little inclined to be irate at the interruption of the evening's festivities, and told the young man that he didn't want to curate. When, however, he saw how disappointed the young fellow looked, I believe he began to shed a tear, and the heart softened. He told him to sit down in the rest of the hall before they attempted to walk back to the station, at which he said he would ask Sir George to send him out a glass of wine. The young man sat down on a chair immediately outside the room by which the thieves entered. Now, I need not tell you who the young man was, nor suggest to your mind, I am sure, the idea that while the servant went to fetch him some wine, or indeed as soon as he saw the coast clear, he slipped into that little room and pulled back the latch of the window and admitted his confederates, who, no doubt, at that very moment were in the hiding on the grounds. The housekeeper did not know whether his meek young curate had a black bag with him. Personally, I have no doubt of that fact, not as it contained in cap, cuffs, collar, and outer garments of Harry Emmett, which were most likely redomed before he returned to the lodgings of Rithred, where I should say he repacked the bag to its clerical contents and wrote his serio-comic letter. This bag, I suppose, he must have deposited in the very early morning before anyone was stirring on the doorstep of the house of Easterbrook Road.
Mr. Dyer drew a long breath. In his heart it was unmitigated admiration of his colleague's skill, which seemed to him to fall a little short of inspiration. By and by, no doubt, he would sing her praises to the first person who came along with a hearty good will. Had he not, however, the slightest intention of so singing them in her own ears, and excessive praise was apt to have a bad effect on the rising practitioner. So he contented himself with saying, "Yes, very satisfactory. Now tell me how you hunted the fellow down to his diggings."
"Oh, that was mere ABC work," answered Loveday. "Mrs. Williams told me that he had left his place at Colonel James's about 6 months previously, and had told her he was going back to look after his old grandmother, who kept a sweet-stuff shop, but where she could not remember. Having heard that Emmeret's father was a cab driver, my thoughts at once flew to a cabman's vernacular, which knows something of, no doubt, and which their Providence Association is designated by the phrase, 'old dear grandmother,' and the office where they make their and receive their payments is styled the sweet stuff shop."
And good Mr. Williams took it all literally, no doubt. She did, and thought what a dear, kind-hearted fellow the young man was. Naturally, I suppose there would be a branch of the association in the nearest market town, and a local trades directory confirmed my suspicion that there was one in Retford. Bearing in mind where the little black bag was found, it was not difficult to believe that young Emmett, possibly through his father's influence and his own prepossessing manners and appearance, had attained some position and trust in the Retford branch. I must confess I scarcely expected to find him as I did, reaching the place, installed as the receiver of the weekly pennies. Of course, I immediately put myself in communication with the police there, and the rest I think you know.
Mr. Dyer's enthusiasm refused to be longer restrained. "It's capital from first to last," he cried. "You've surpassed yourself this time."
"The only thing that saddens me," said Loveday, "is the thought of the possible poor fate of little Stephanie."
Loveday's anxieties on Stephanie's behalf were, however, put to a flight before another 24 hours had passed. The first post on the following morning brought a letter from Miss Williams telling how she had been found the night before was over, half dead and cold of fright, on the verge of the stream running through Craigen Wood. "Found, too," wrote the housekeeper,
"by the very person who ought to have found her, young Holt, who was in the desperate in love with her. Thank goodness that at the last moment her courage failed, and she, instead of throwing herself into the stream, sank down, half fainting beside it. Holt took her straight home to his mother, and there at the farm she is now, being taken care of and petted gently by everyone."
Okay.